book, Black Against the State, discussing the Black Panther Party and what they represented. Shaquille, why don't you tell me what are some things you enjoyed about the Black Panther Party in that book?
The history of it. Like I got this book, I want to say a decade ago, and I had it mixed up with another book, so I thought I read it, and I
Yeah.
didn't read it until like 2 years ago. So I've had this book for about a decade, and I got it mixed up with some reason for Huey P. Newton's Revolutionary Suicide, because
Oh
Huey
wow.
covers both. But what I like about this book, it is a detailed description. It's not coming from one person's perspective, so it doesn't lend itself to this subjectiveness. Like
Right.
Huey had his experience with the party. Um, you know, Bobby Seale had his experience. Kathleen Cleaver had her experience, and they all have their individual books and their individual work and their individual interviews in regard to the Panthers. But what I like is the amount of research that went into it. Just within this book alone, there is 140 pages worth of notes. So if you don't believe something that's in there, you can go and look this up based off of the resources that are there. Like for me, the book has to be accurate. It has to be detailed. And it has to give me something that I don't know, or give me a way of thinking about something that I did know, but think about it a little bit differently. Because the Panthers themselves are starting out in the 60s. Bobby and Huey meet each other in 62. A lot
Right.
of people
Right.
don't know Bobby is 6 years older than Huey.
Okay. Okay. Yep. Indeed.
Huey, and even with Huey, all the stuff that he had to go through to arrive at a point to where he wants to be this organizer. He wants to galvanize around Black people, and state repression did that.
Absolutely. So let's talk about state oppression. What do you think the biggest misconception about the Panthers really is? Because I can tell you when I'm lecturing about the Panthers or whatever that is, people automatically assume they were this super aggressive militant group. And they don't know anything about the healthcare services, survival programs as they were called. Like, what do you think the biggest misconception about the Black Panthers are?
Is that they were this terrorist organization, but that comes from social conditioning. Because if your government is entrusted with the education of the people, with the programming that you get a chance to see, if we're only seeing it, and we're kind of seeing it in real time now with the discussion around Hamas and their role within liberating the Palestinian people. The Panthers played that same exact role, and they understood how important it was to have these connections, not only within the Black community, but other third world peoples and oppressed peoples across the globe. Like, they could say they were a terrorist organization, but when you look at the files, the COINTELPRO files, they were like, oh, knocking on people's doors and telling them the Panthers are a terrorist organization. Don't have your kids go down there for breakfast. But before the Panthers, there was no free breakfast program. There was no clinics. There was no community program.
Preach.
You know, I think, yeah, that I wish people would tune out of whatever the mainstream is telling them, and tune into actual writings, actual history, actual research. I'm not saying that the Panther Party itself is perfect. Nothing is perfect. There's literally no such thing that exists. But the Panthers as a grassroots organization are as close to ideal, I think, as we would get as a collective. I mean, you can draw from some of the mistakes that were there inevitably, but they're pretty much learning on the go.
Right. All power to all people. So how do you feel about people calling the Panthers like anti, because I hear this a lot, and you probably do, you're a reader, you're a scholar, like anti, all these groups. I think that's another big misconception. The Panthers were about coalition, unifying all people in a variety, regardless of ethnicity, phenotype, all power to all people, right? Why do you think that individuals are so easily bamboozled into believing that the Panthers were anti-white or anti all these things without reading for themselves? How, like I said, the Panthers were about a coalition.
think the people that hold these particular positions is disingenuous, and these are people that prefer to get their information, their history from a 10-second TikTok or Instagram
Right.
clip than to actually read. This is the Panthers aligned themselves with the Students for Democratic Society, which was predominantly white, with the Young Patriots, with the Young Lords. These are things that are documented. They understood that not only exploitation of African people across the diaspora because we're African, but they understood, okay, well, this person is living in deep poverty the same way that I'm living in deep poverty, irrespective of color. They had coalitions with the Vietnamese, they had coalitions with the Palestinians. You can go and research these things, and it's talked about within the book in terms of coalitions that they had. So they weren't anti anything. They were anti imperialists, they were anti capitalist, but they were also building on a multiracial coalition, very much so.
Mhm.
And
Right.
they had these alliances. Not just that. There's the misconception that
And then, of course, the whole George Floyd situation in more modern times. But the Panthers were ahead of that, right? Why don't you speak
oh,
about that?
absolutely.
Why don't you speak about the Panthers and what they knew their rights. They were right. They were law students. So discuss how they were ahead of the curve when it came to police brutality and holding police accountable for their actions in the community.
So Huey, and I'd be remiss to not mention Dr. Huey P. Newton had a PhD in philosophy, but he had also taken law classes and carried a law book in the backseat of his vehicles at all times, at the backseat of his vehicle or whatever vehicle he was in at all times. He met law enforcement where they were at in regard to, okay, well, we're not giving up this because that goes against our rights. We're not giving up this, and make them stand on what it is that they absolutely believe in. Huey understood the importance of political education, of being organized in certain situations. It wasn't just we're gonna go out there and patrol police or take a video of them without weighing the pros and cons of this thing. The Panthers, and being very much so a product of state repression, they were like, okay, if we do it this way, there's a very good chance that we don't achieve anything. That had to be the mindset going in. But if we do it like this, if we can get the people behind us, if we can get the people to see this is what's going on, then if we could just grab a few more. Everybody can't go. You can't save everybody. Not even Harriet Tubman was able to. Right.
Right.
So it's like, and I think that's part of the challenge too. It's just within our own. Sometimes we get so deeply conditioned into the BS that we don't know which way is up.
Hmm.
But with the Panthers, we're addressing material needs. Like, well, you don't have adequate housing, you don't have food. The police are constantly. And I understood that, having been introduced to them early on, even walking outside of the neighborhood that I'm from. It's like, well, damn, before I even get to the end of my block, there's 4 or 5 police officers right there. And you see the diametric, you see how polar opposite it is when you live in like the suburbs versus living in the hood or living in a city. Very rarely do you see police congregated, like, unless they live in the neighborhood in the suburbs. Throughout the ghettos in the US, it's a heavy police presence. Like, I could go downtown right now and I'm like, all right, this is most police I'm gonna see for a month. Whereas over here, if I see a officer or whatever, it's somebody that lives in a complex, or somebody that knows somebody that lives in a complex, as far as that particular aspect of it is concerned. But
Right.
yeah, the Panthers understood, hey, listen, we're all subject to state repression, but I don't think the people are viewing it the way that they should. There were things that happened in succession, and before the Panthers came about. So like 64, you have, I think it's 64 or 65, you have the Watts riots, right? So they understand what's going on around them. Them being in Oakland and the riots happening in South Central Los Angeles, not that different. And I only mentioned Watts because Rodney King, in the grand scheme of things, is not that far after it.
Right.
I'm 5 years old when Rodney King happens, and just looking, and even before that, Latasha Harlins.
Oh my. Yes.
And the verdict is the same. You get tired
On
of
video.
seeing that. on video. You get tired of seeing that. Rodney King got beat on video. Latasha Hollins got killed on video. And I think one of the most damning things to come out of that Rodney King situation is him getting up on screen with the busted face, the swollen face, and saying, "Can we all just get along?" There is no get along at that point. You literally tried to kill me. There's several officers, you know, you hitting something to the point where you could hear the object
I remember
pushing
that.
up. Uh, like to me, it's insanity, and it's the same way now. You know, you fast forward to 2020, and the officer's got his foot, or he's kneeling down on George Floyd's neck for damn near 10 minutes, or even jogging. Ahmaud Arbery happened before, but these are things that continuously happen over
Ahmad.
and over and over and over, and the media does this trick where they keep calling it an isolated incident.
Mhm. Ahmaud Arbery, I'm gonna tell you, Shaquille, that was jarring for me, and it was borderline personal because I'm a jogger.
Mm-hmm.
I put my headphones in, and us women who jog, we know that we're a little incognito. We have our hats on and stuff, a little bigger clothes, so for safety purposes. And I was thinking, like, man, I'm a jogger, so when I jog like that, I'm thinking, like, am I perceived as a threat? Like, and a lot of those are things that oftentimes women we don't think about it. But when that Ahmaud Arbery situation happened, it was jarring to me because I was thinking I do some of those same type of moves. Like when my headphones are in, I'm feeling good. I'm just moving. I'm not even thinking about what someone else may be thinking I'm doing, which clearly I'm not. So that was definitely a jarring situation. I believe they're actually in the middle of that trial right now. Like some motions just happened with that. I just read it. I can't remember what happened. I think they were trying to change some evidence or something, but it was denied. It was definitely denied. So I'm happy you put all of that in context of the 1960s because all of that is important. You have Medgar Evers assassinated. You have Malcolm X, Brother Malcolm's assassinated. Of course, Kennedy's assassinated, and then you have the development of the Panthers in 1966. That really puts into context all of the courses of actions that's developing at this time. Why do you think the Black Panthers were such a threat? Because we know that the fall of the Panthers were, this divide and conquer strategy, right? Like you mentioned a few moments later, you said even Harriet Tubman wasn't really able to get everyone. And that divide and conquer strategy, I'm going to tell you, I've been put in a situation to where someone tried to use me and I seen it coming 10 miles away. And then I've been
Mm-hmm.
put in a situation where people were used against me, and by the time they realized they were being used in a pond, the damage was already done. So that divide and conquer strategy is old and people still use it. But what I'm more annoyed about is that people keep falling for it. Like, why can't you identify that divide and conquer strategy um before it happens? Because it's been used. Why do you think the Panthers were such a threat? Why did it scare J. Edgar Hoover so much that he had to develop COINTELPRO? And although it was used beforehand, we know that, like against communists. But why do you think it was the Panthers that really made them public enemy number one until they were done? Like the purpose was to J. Edgar Hoover's language, was to neutralize
Mm-hmm.
them, to disband. Like they were public enemy number one. Why do you think they were such a threat?
I think Hoover wanted to annihilate them. I don't even think he wanted to neutralize, because neutralize would leave them in existence versus the way that they ultimately ended up, right? Or what we ended off with. And I think that the threat for the government is you now have this collective of young Black people that can galvanize other people around them. You had people that are educated. You had people that took from the history. The Panthers are direct descendants of Malcolm X. You know what I mean? And also in large part, they are snake babies as well. The tactic itself was just different between the Panthers and Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, as far as inevitably them being nonviolent, and the Panthers saying we don't have this particular option. That's the one thing about Dr. King I never agreed with. I can't get with somebody spitting on me or putting their hands on me, and there's no response. I'm not that. I, I don't have the capacity for it as far as that particular aspect of it is concerned. Or getting stabbed or getting kicked, which are all things that happen, and it's hell no. The Panthers understood just who came before them. So as direct descendants of that, the government is like, damn, we did see this previously. We didn't have anything in place. We're going to do this. Because the Panthers early on, right, they started October 15th, 1966. They didn't really get their numbers up, and it was a slow build up until they went to the state capitol in Sacramento. So with them going up there armed, in Sacramento or the state of California from then on in, changing the gun laws, while they took away something from the Panthers that was tangible, that was physical, them being armed, them walking around with it, people saw that and they was like, damn, well, that's what bolstered it. So state repression, while it ultimately did them in, there were certain avenues and aspects to where it's like, okay, they took this away. It was organized. It wasn't like the Panthers just went in there like it was January 6th and it was some BS. It was organized that they went to the Capitol and were able to have people see that and get behind them that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that you said that, because I think sometimes that may be a bigger threat. And history has shown that, like, when you're educated, or Ida B. Wells's research talks about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
When the black man who is the business owner, right? He's the target of the Klan, right? He's lynched, or the professional or the educated one. Those are the ones who were targeted because they were smart, they were sophisticated. So yeah, that does make sense that the Panthers, being extremely intelligent, being students, knowing the law, Huey knowing the law, and that was a threat, more so than, say, someone else who was not as coursed in those legal laws like Huey and Bobby, for sure.
But what I love about Dr. Huey P is that he was always like, yo, whatever we do, we got to be able to bring it back to the block. So while I might be educated, I might have been able to have the opportunity to go to school. I enjoy learning, from like these university philosophers, because they were also Marxist Leninists, right? So while I enjoy learning, I have to be able to make this make sense for the people that's out there on the block. People don't connect the dots to see we've got All African People's Revolutionary Party, which is a revolutionary group which Kwame Ture was very much a part of. Founded by Kwame Nkrumah in 1968. They actually came after the Panthers, and the ideology is similar. We call it Marxist Leninist, and Nkrumah Ture is Cabralist over there on that end at the AAPRP, which I'm a part of. They in looking at Huey, it was always, how can I relate this to my brothers and sisters that's out there that's struggling, to the people that got to walk through life the way that I got to walk through life. Even when I go back to my old neighborhood now, I was just in my neighborhood in May, and it's like, how can I talk to somebody and meet the people where they are? Yeah, we could kick it on the bench, but let's go pick this book up afterwards. Let's go do this afterwards. And it's the same thing with Malcolm. Like, if you look at Malcolm, the same way the Panthers did, came from very impoverished beginnings. So I like to draw those parallels between them being just Malcolmites and them being babies of Malcolm. I think Malcolm's assassination, more so than anything, sparked it. The Watts riots were there, but Malcolm's assassination, more so than anything else, lit that fire.
Mm-hmm.
Huey and Dr. Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale were part of other organizations before. They met on campus at Merritt College,
right,
in 62. The Panthers don't get started until 66. So it's like, what is the ultimate catalyst to that? You have to think about it in the context of, okay, Bobby and Huey were very much alive for Montgomery bus boycott, very much alive for, Emmett Till,
Selma.
very much alive for Selma. They are, when Malcolm gets killed in 65, in February of 65, they're in their early 20s. When something happens prior to that, you're a kid, so you're not thinking about this on an abstract level. But as these things continue to develop and they continue to happen, you're like, well, damn. Like I said, in 92, when the Rodney King situation happened, I'm a kid. Yeah, it's going to affect me because it's some horrific stuff to see. But when these things happen into your adulthood and nothing else is changed, you have to begin to look at these things differently. And the Panthers understood that. They understood, listen, the government ain't gonna save us. It don't matter whether it's Democratic, don't matter whether it's Republican. The government ain't gonna save us. So this is the way that we need to look at this and have to govern ourselves as far as political education goes in our communities and our hoods.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And when you spoke about Malcolm, you actually sparked a thought. Ronald Stokes, the issue with Ronald Stokes in LA that kind of caused a little bit of friction between Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm, when Malcolm wasn't really accepting to this nonviolent situation. Like Malcolm wanted to retaliate against the Ronald Stokes beating. I believe it was an issue with the LAPD. And Ronald Stokes, he was murdered. He was killed. And Elijah Muhammad did not feel that there needed to be a retaliation with that particular situation. Why do you think the Panthers, of all the groups, civil rights groups, and I'm not really the type of person to like put the civil rights movement in a certain era, decade. In my opinion, the civil rights movement began as soon as, chattel slavery was indoctrinated in a variety of these state laws. That's kind of when people are beginning to try to break the chains, if I may. So most people are familiar with the civil rights movement beginning with Emmett Till and then through the 60s. Why do you think the Panthers are often left out of that conversation? Because even when I talk to people, when we discuss Montgomery, all important, by the way, we discuss Till, the Panthers, for whatever reason, and maybe like you mentioned earlier, it could be the propaganda. Maybe J. Edgar Hoover was successful in, distorting memory of the Panthers because that was the ultimate goal. Why do you think they're left out? Because the Panthers give us sickle cell testing. It was them who started that. Free lunch, like we both talked about earlier. Free breakfast, excuse me, for the kids. Survival programs, 10-point programs. Was it because they were seen as, like you said, quote unquote Marxist Leninists, that they were rejected?
No. Because the average person doesn't know what Marxist, and that's no disrespect to my people, at all, to the people in general, but don't understand what Marxism and Leninism, Marxist-Leninist is, because it's been given to them and it's been curated by the same people designed to oppress them. The same way you could call somebody a communist in the 50s, 60s, and so on. Look at what they just did in regard to having people believe that their kids are really learning CRT in elementary schools. And it's the same dog whistle. It's the same thing. And just looking at these parallels, like I tell people, I'm a student of politics, something that I have my degree in, but I also minored in history, but I took the minor aspect of it very seriously.
Right.
Because as the adage goes, those that don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. I think that with the Panthers, again, it's easier to get your information from a 10-second TikTok video or from Instagram or whatever social media platform you would go to or you would go on. More people don't know about the Panthers the same way that more people don't know about Africans that came before slavery.
Yeah,
And there's more
right.
people that need to read Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa the same way that people would read Black Against Empire, which is the book
Yeah.
that we're discussing as far as that aspect of it is concerned. The most repressive thing you can do to to a person is annihilate their history. If we go
Mhm.
back to it, and when we were enslaved, they didn't even acknowledge the fact that people had birthdays. There's a reason why Frederick Douglass's birthday is arbitrary, but he chose Valentine's Day,
I
right?
know. I
So it's
know.
like I know it's somewhere in this area, whatever the case may be, just from maybe accounts that he had gotten, the stories that he may have gotten. No other group of people has to create a birthday,
Mm.
has been erased, has been put in as just numbers. Even prior to the Holocaust, Jewish people knew who they were. Africans, on the other hand, it's like, yo, okay, cool. If we're gonna repress these people, if we're going to kill off any ideas or anything else, we have to erase whatever they have of the history. So
And
you
the
would start there.
and the
It's the
lies.
same. God, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Go. You're fine.
It's the same thing you were stating earlier with why would you kill doctors, lawyers? Look at what's happening in Palestine. They're killing journalists, they're blowing up hospitals. Any institution in which you might have somebody that could come out of it and educate the people or galvanize the people, out of there. The problem with our people is the doctors, the lawyers, those that got put in the black bourgeois class, as far as that particular aspect of it is concerned, they're not going back to the hood. They're not delivering this message to the people, which is what Huey was big on. At the very beginning, he's like, yo, okay, cool. I understand this. I got to be able to go and give it back to the people. And this is a conversation that I have often. Like, I'm from the hood. I grew up in poverty. I'm a sugar water baby. I, you know, I grew up in the 80s. Well, I was born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s for the most part in a single parent household. And, we didn't always have it, but it's like, okay, cool. I know that I'm good at school. Let me go here and then let me come chop it up with my people and see where they're at with it in order to be able to push them forward. I'm only as good as the people that I'm surrounding myself with. I'm only as good as the neighborhood that I come from.
What do you think changed you? So you mentioned some obstacles growing up, right? You got into reading, it sounds like, immediately, right? You got into your history. Do you think that changed you? Because I'm asking this question for a reason. Some people believe this I don't want to say attack because that's an aggressive word and I don't like when my words are cherry picked and people do that online. Well, you said this. Let's just say this. What is your opinion on the changing of African American history, the dilution of it? And I'm asking this question for a reason. Some people believe that when you teach individuals their history and their struggle and where they came from, it emboldens them, right? It gives them power, it gives them strength. And it sounds like that's pretty much what could have like taken you out of a situation. Like you said, you had hurdles and that's okay, but it took you to college, it took you once you started to read, it took you to all these places that you never thought you would go. Do you think reading was that catalyst for you, or parenting, or what do you think? I would say your factor was that transitioned you over those hurdles that you mentioned earlier. What's
My
that?
mother was just parenting.
Parenting.
My
Yeah.
mother, my mother was definitely the one that sparked it in me. I was one of them kids where if I'm reading something I don't know the word, I'll go ask my mother. So, and getting tired of me asking, go look this up. You've now got to write this down in order to get it. And whenever I had to do like a history report or whenever I had to do current events, which was often, even if there was no schoolwork assigned, my mother would literally make me turn cartoons off in order to watch national news and to watch global news to find out what's going on in the rest of the world, not just here.
Right.
And then she knew what they were teaching me in school, and she knew that it was some nonsense. So while I would have to do the assignment in order to get ahead through the class or whatever the case may be, my mother would be like, yo, this is how it is from a very early age, from the first time you got to do like a Columbus Day report or some other nonsense like that, you know, not to necessarily mince words, but my mother was like, how you going to discover something that's already here? And was kicking it to me like that at a very early age, I think, and then just allowing me to watch certain programming. Like I had stated earlier, just you always in the hood, you got people at the house. Sometimes they leave stuff behind. So autobiography of Malcolm X was left behind. Fortunately enough, I'm like, well, I already watched the movie, even though I hold the movie near and dear for like sentimental value, not for historical context, as far as that aspect of it is concerned. But yeah, and being able to kind of go through these books and read through them. If I don't understand a word, I got to go look it up. That's what the spark itself began. But then as you get older, as you begin to have your own interactions with police, I had a lieutenant one time tell me I look guilty. I'm literally coming home from my summer job. I'm like 14 years old, or being stopped going, or somebody that I know, a few of the brothers from the block did get in trouble for various things. I was still hanging out with them, and for some reason, I've been fortunate enough to never be caught up in anything. Like there'd be times where I just left a friend 2, 3 minutes ago, and then police got him right after I just left him, just because I went in the opposite direction.
Wow, that's divine intervention.
Or shootouts, and I managed to like, all right, cool. Well, I'm in my house or whatever the case may be. I'm talking about close to the point where you can see the spark coming off the gun. So it's like I've been fortunate, to say the least, in regards to that. But as far as my political education and the way that I view things, my mother and Malcolm X, that's why I don't necessarily hold institutional education in high regard, because these are two people that I know for a fact did not finish high school. So I never looked at the institutions that are funded by the same system that's meant to oppress us to be the educator for me, because I knew better going through it. Like I didn't even start college until I was like 23. So I went and I worked a little bit after high school, and then the foundation that I already had made it that much easier for me to go ahead and go through coursework, because I've already had lived experiences.
Hmm. Absolutely. Autodidacts are the way to go. I'm really big on parenting. I say that a lot. Like you can, if you put the foundation, what is right, into a child, that is the best way to go. You have to establish that good parenting at home. I am pro that. That is something I talk about a lot. Some people don't like it. Sometimes it come off wrong, but no, that is something. It starts in the home. It's parenting. If you have at least one, some type of anybody, it doesn't net any type of figure. Maybe sometimes it's a coach, sometimes it's a teacher, sometimes it's a librarian, whomever. You need someone to kind of put you onto some type of proper course. And like you said, your mother was that person, and that's who it should be. It should always start in the home. But unfortunately, sometimes people don't have that structure, and that's
For me,
unfortunate.
I'm sorry, I cut you
No,
off.
you're good. You're good.
I was saying, for me, it was my mother, but it was also the community that I had around me. Like I said, I grew up in a single parent household. A little more context than that. My father transitioned when I was young. So when I was 9 years old, my pops passed away. So at 9 years old, you don't fully understand the depth of things. You might be reading stuff, you might be able to watch it, but there's no way you understand it enough to articulate it coming out of that. You know what I mean? But yeah, long story short, it was for me, my mother kept the spark going, and then the community that I had around me. I had people within the community that really took to me. Even like some of the gang members, they was like, "Nah, shorty, go to school." It was never just. That's why I said I never look at the brothers on the block as less than, because they kept me out of situations in which, had I gotten into them, I turned out differently. So it's that additional person going, "Yo, go to school." Some of them have transitioned through, and moved on, but it's like, go to school, do this, don't let me catch you doing, X, Y, and Z. So it was really community and communal building. A lot of the lessons that I got were outside the classroom, and in my mom's house. My mother, without putting a name to it, she was the first person I saw that was socialist in the way that she carried herself. I would get mad sometimes because we would have like, we only had a little bit with me and my mom and my little sister. My older sister has already gone out the house or whatever the case may be. But yeah, we barely had enough food for the three of us. So, but my mom always fed people when they came to the crib. People always, if they were in dire straits, had a place to stay. It might have been, all right, you got to take the couch for a little bit, or you got to sleep on the floor. And then just different people from different walks of life. My mother didn't care what color, my mother didn't care what your lifestyle was. These are things that I saw, you know, in front of me in my house. So from that, I was just able to move through. So I was fortunate.
And those lessons are definitely taught, for sure. It's interesting you talked about the community, and that's kind of a gripe that a lot of modern people will have. They'll talk about how the community has changed, and you've heard this argument before. Segregation, when we were segregated, you've seen the matriculation of life and all that type of argument. How you seen your Black doctors and your dentists and your educators all within the same community because we were segregated. You've heard that argument. But what people need to hear more about is, like you just said, just because things have changed and you may have some urban areas that are a little bit more, let's just say, violent in certain areas, not all. Certain areas can be more violent. Those are symptoms of bigger issues. We know that. They still have people in there, like you said, that can guide you in a way. They know right from wrong is basically what I'm saying. It's, I
Hmm.
really dislike when I hear that urban argument, like, oh, it's just so bad. Like when you hear people discuss
Hmm.
certain parts of Chicago, right? The south side of Chicago. You hear that all the time. And it's like, actually, you've probably never been to the south side of Chicago, because there's certain parts that they experience some urban decay, that it hasn't been rebuilt since the King riots in 68. So there's just all these layers of things that occurred and people just don't know, right? And then of course you can talk about how drugs were infiltrated in those communities intentionally and the like. So I mean, I wish people heard more stories about how you said individuals who are trying to survive realize that what they're doing isn't right, but they're trying to survive. I can't really speak on how people choose to live their life, but they're smart enough to say this isn't for you, right? They're smart enough to guide you in a way that benefited you, clearly push you in a new direction. You
Yeah,
know,
and I'm not co-signing it. I understand it. You know what I
right?
mean? Especially, I understand it. Like sometimes, and it's really, we have to look at that. Like you mentioned, infiltration, right? Is another. State repression is not just one thing; it's multifaceted. So when we look at it, state repression comes in a form of just pulling funding from the community that you live in, pulling funding from the school that you go to, making it to where there's no money for like after school programs and stuff like that, or there's no money, for free food for kids that don't have it at home. When you live in the projects, it's like, all right, cool. You got food deserts, or you got, a liquor store on every corner. You don't really have healthy choices. So as long as we continue to suppress these things, as long as we can, get it to where people don't have to read, people don't have to think deeply about why they're in the conditions that they're in, and they don't decolonize their minds, then that's the difficult part, is getting people to decolonize their minds. I'm not saying everybody's thinking has to be uniform, but I do need people to think about these conditions more, on a deeper level. Like I said, I grew up in the projects, but I was fortunate because one of the things that happened to us is the public school that I went to, PS 151 in Queens, they had middle class homes, and I put middle class in air quotes because I don't believe that you either rich or you poor. There's have and have not, but the middle class housing was in close proximity to the school. So if you're going based off of taxation, it changes the dynamic of certain things.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you mentioned Manny Marable's book. That's one of my favorite books of all time. How Capitalism Destroyed Black America. That
Hmm.
is a that book is a powerhouse. And in fact,
I mentioned Walter Rodney, but I know that one too.
yeah, oh yeah, you did mention that, right, as well. Both of those books are in my top 10 for sure. Ed Baptiste, a lot of his information in that book, Half Has Never Been Told, comes from both of those books, and he references that pretty good in his book, also. So kudos to giving props to where the information came from. But that is something that I think a lot of people are unfamiliar with, is like you mentioned, the tax base, yes, the education as well. So when you talked about a lot of the funding being taken from these programs, um that goes into education as well. That can definitely cause a problem with individuals getting the resources that they need. Why do you think that's done? Do you think it's because individuals are targeted, or do you think it's financial? Because I'm really not big on victimization. Like, do you think that because you've heard this argument, you're top notch educated, smart across the board, but you've heard that argument that said, well, when individuals didn't have before 1964, you've had your super smart people who came out of segregated schools. You've heard that argument. We've all heard that argument. Hidden Figures, those women were educated by top-notch Black educators in segregated schools. Those women went on to be calculators for NASA. And many, Charles Drew, many of our greats came out of segregated schools, where the educators were top-notch. And I talk about that, actually, Leslie Fenwick book. But the infrastructure may have been a little shaky, but the educators were top notch. So, like, the best, more qualified than any of the educators, whom jobs I believe, were in limbo with when integration happened. But that's another story. Like, so do you think there are some cultural shifts that occurred? And I have a little bit of opinion, but not a great. It's not an overbearing opinion, because I think all cultures shift, right? It's not just one culture shifts. I think American culture shifted. And then you have some subcultures that sometimes can be more attractive to people than the dominant culture, because we know our Frederick Douglasses and our Dr. Huey P. Newtons and the like, MLK, Malcolm X, Angela Davis, one of my favorite, Ida B. Wells, you know, Fannie Lou Hamer, all those people, that is top-notch culture. But for some reason, trickle down, some subcultures became more attractive. Do you think that was a little bit of the case for some people? Not all of us, clearly we're here, but for maybe the youth, maybe a section of the youth. Because I feel that the dominant culture for some larger part of dominant Black culture is American culture. Like, just, you turn on any BBC or any, Asian television or the like, and you see Black culture as American culture. So I'm not saying that subculture is a problem. I don't really like to do that. But something shifted. Like, what do you think that shift was?
I mean, cultural shifts definitely happen. The only reason why I would say a little bit of pushback, I would take MLK out of that particular cadre of people, simply because he grew up middle class. When we talk about the Hueys, when we talk about the Malcolms, they grew up in deep poverty, right? Like Malcolm X is a high school dropout, right? He didn't even finish the ninth grade, what would be considered high school today. But he's by far the smartest person that I've ever read from, or that I take from.
I agree.
Huey was semi-literate coming out of high school because of conditions that he was, had to deal with, and that he was faced with. Frederick Douglass was enslaved. He literally had to trick white people into teaching him how to, for him to learn how to read, or for him to learn how to write, and went on to be one of the best writers I've ever seen. Because when I'm
Dignified.
looking at how I would measure somebody's ability to write or somebody's ability to articulate, where did you start and where did you end up? Like Frederick Douglass started not having anything, and forget about being in deep poverty. You're literally property,
No. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
and yeah, so but yeah, I think as far as cultural shifts, I'm trying to see how I can articulate an answer to that particular question because it has a minute thing to do with it. I think all of these people have succeeded in spite of this system, not
Right.
necessarily being a product of the system. And the ones that have fell beneath it, unfortunately, it's due to circumstance.
Right.
Nobody wants to nobody wants to do harm to anybody, and nobody necessarily wants to commit crime. Crime itself is a byproduct of poverty.
Agree. Drugs,
You
same
know,
thing. Self-medication.
that's it. Again, it's to go back to what I said earlier. You've been down for so long that you don't know what up looks like at that point, and the things that you would need in order for you to get ahead of the very things that are being taken away. I think we have to detach ourselves from the U.S. Like I'll go back to what Malcolm said. It's probably one of my favorite quotes because it's straight to the point. We're not Americans. We're Africans that happen to be in America. Look at all of the other stuff that happens, right? You get people that get killed over traffic stops. You get people that get killed over welfare checks. You get people that, that they're criminalizing the kids when they're in
Oh yeah.
elementary school.
Well,
So
you
let's
have your own personal situation. You had someone at 14 years old tell you you look guilty.
yeah, one of the lieutenants from the NYPD that just so happened to be, I was coming home from a summer gig or whatever, stopped me and one of my boys on the way back to my house, and so that was 14, but even earlier than that, I can go back to fifth grade. I mean, probably something I shouldn't have did in hindsight, but talking to or having my mom say something to me would have sufficed. So I got in trouble in class for goofing off, and I forged my mother's name on a letter they sent to the house. So long story short, my signature does not look anything like my mom's signature looked,
Right.
and of course I get in trouble. But they also sent police to the school. I'm 9, 10 years old at that point. I don't need to have any interactions with police.
I agree. I agree. The
But
young
again, it's tied into that state repression. We get to look at these people this way, and people think that it's something that could be reformed. It can, and the Panthers understood that. We want to end to police brutality
right.
is one of the 10 points.
Yeah.
And brutality, just like repression, is multifaceted. Like I was just reading this article where this 11-year-old got shot in the chest off of a simple welfare check. This article is as of yesterday, as of December 14th. It's the 15th now.
Wow. Unbelievable.
And this happened, I believe, in Mississippi. So the same forms exist. I have this thing that I say where the game doesn't change, the players do. The same system is in place. Police work, we all know, it's widely documented, rooted in slavery, rooted in the oppression of African people. So if it's rooted in that and it proceeds in that and it thrives in that, we could go from all the way to where the slave patrol started through now. And I'll go back to New York, where I'm from. Staten Island, every garden that happened, illegal chokehold.
Man, yes.
And I think where we fall short, and I think what the Panthers understood it needed to go further, kind of diving back into the book a little bit and drawing that parallel. And this is also drawn not only off the Panthers, but on Malcolm. We will settle for material concession instead of actual substantive change. It's like in 2020, I don't care how many times they wrote Black Lives Matter in the streets in DC or whatever other major city.
Right.
The simple thing to do would be to stop killing us. The simple thing to do would be to admit to the fact that Black folks are human. But in dehumanizing people over centuries, you end up with the stuff like this.
I gotta some people don't know that. And I addressed this a few times. So I had to have a strong conversation with someone about the dehumanization of Black people by those people who chose to call themselves Christians, right? There were a sector of people who practiced Christianity, who developed the propaganda of slavery. Like I said, I've already discussed this, and I've gotten pushback because I'm thinking, like, who doesn't know this? Even Frederick Douglass talks
Mm-hmm.
about this in his autobiography. He criticizes it. So I was shocked by the pushback I received. I'm thinking, like, how do we have America, because other people know our history, American history, other countries know this. So I was shocked when I received the pushback from people who were accusing me of making stuff up. And I'm like, who doesn't know about the doctrine of discovery? Who doesn't know that the same place that went to war over slavery is called the Bible Belt? Like who are the people who are not drawing these parallels? The ideology of slavery, the curse of Ham, like all this stuff. I'm not saying all Christians believe this, of course not. I'm saying that Christianity during the institution of slavery was a part of it. That ideology that pushed the narrative that Black people were somehow deduced to being slaves to every other, ethnic group and all this other stuff. Like, I was shocked at the pushback I received from that. Like, and I'm still kind of like shocked by it, because I'm thinking, like, who didn't know that? Like, how did you go? And this actually goes back to something that you said, the education in the school system. You're not a big fan of that brick and mortar P12 system because some things aren't told. Some things are just kind of scurried around. You don't have to teach no one's teaching CRT in the P12 system. First of all, that doesn't happen. That's not true. But you can talk about some racial issues without making people feel bad and all this other stuff. Like, how do you discuss Native Americans being in this country and then now being roughly 1% of the population, without bringing into some uncomfortable conversations? But like, I don't really get too caught up in the culture wars, because that's what politicians want us to do. I just think we need to get in the books ourselves. If people want to ban books, okay, that's the book we'll push. That's the book that I think you should be introduced to. If you want to ban all these books that are discussing important issues that will make us better Americans, that's the book you want to read. I was jarred when they banned The Bluest Eye. Like, I was just shocked.
Mm-hmm. Because it bans something like The Bluest Eye. The Bluest Eye. The premise of it is how this young Black woman sees herself, right?
Right.
And Toni Morrison's writing, as far as that particular aspect of it is concerned. You ban it because it's not conducive to status quo, which is the same reason why you would ban any other book. Anything that's going to get people to think is going to end up banned. And it's not just African-centered authors that would get banned, or, I'm always looking for something that is not considered to be safe writing. And so when I look at the Panthers, or I think about the Panthers, I've always chosen to do, even as a school kid, my reports had to be on somebody nobody else was going to pick.
Right.
Why would I pick MLK when this is the person that's quote unquote allowable? I went to school in Queens. Malcolm X lived in Queens. The kids in public school in Queens cannot learn about Malcolm X.
Wow. So wait, his autobiography is banned?
Yeah, you can't teach it in there.
Wow.
Unless they
I did
unless
not
they
know that.
changed it. Malcolm X had a house in Elmhurst. Elmhurst was
Yeah,
10
he
to
did.
15 minutes away from where I grew up. My grandmother worked in a hospital over there.
Wow.
But yeah, on that list, outside of just the Bluest Eye, because Toni Morrison, I think ultimately, for as much as I love Toni Morrison, she became one of the acceptable authors. I want to hear the voices of the people that's like, okay, well, we don't want you reading this, that, and the other, even if it is somebody that's like white. I was reading this book Fahrenheit 451, which the
Oh
premise is the
yes.
temperature at which books burn at. And
Yes.
it's this dystopia where the fire department, and I think that with banning books, which is not something that just happened now, they've been banning books previously. It's just the list is being they're enlarging the list of things you can and cannot read. But anyway, long story short, it is the erasing books from the history, getting rid of certain books you can't find. And outside of just the state doing it in schools, so much is where they're pulling out libraries from certain schools. Like whole libraries getting pulled out of schools is crazy to me. Just to avoid this person picking up this book, you know, in the prison system, there's a there's regulation over what books prisoners can read, what brothers and sisters behind the wall can read. And Mumia Abu Jamal, I mentioned him, one, because he was a Panther. Two, I was born in 86. Mumia Abu Jamal's been behind the wall since 1982. Let's put that into perspective. That's 41 years.
Wow.
That's 41 years. They are letting our freedom fighters out with just enough time for them to die, which is what I was talking about with like state repression. So you look at like a Ruchell McGee, you look at like a Mumia Abu Jamal, you look at even out here, because I'm in Arizona, about 2 hours away in Tucson is Imam Jamil Al-Amin, formerly known as H. Rap Brown, who was also closely linked to the Panthers. When Huey was locked up, H. Rap was the one out there giving his speech saying, yo, we not free because Huey's chair is empty. And talking about anything we don't own could be weaponized against us. We don't own the educational institutions. Why would you let these people teach your kids? These hospital corporations, white supremacy permeates every single facet of our daily lives. Even when you talk about that comfort thing, who is this comfortable for and who is this uncomfortable for? Because all they're doing with the banning the books is removing it so that way white kids don't have to feel away, particularly in Florida where they said the quiet part out loud. In the South, where the most heinous things happen. Me, I'm fortunate. I'm born and raised in Queens. However, I spent every summer in the South as a kid. All
Wow.
Black people migrated from down south somewhere. Even the Panthers, Huey and Bobby family from down south. Fred Hampton family from down south. I spent every summer in South Carolina, and South Carolina is important in the historical context because it was the first state to secede.
It was.
Over slavery.
Yeah.
I remember going to my grandparents' house in the summertime. We would have to drive to a different town in order to get groceries. There would be Confederate flags hanging up. They didn't remove the Confederate flag from South Carolina, I think, until like 2015, 2016.
After the Mother Emanuel. Yeah.
And it took that. And they've been blowing up our institutions. They've been blowing up the church because they know that's where the people congregate. They've been blowing up. They've been shooting people up in these churches. And I don't even think that these are isolated incidents, which is how the news weaponizes the language. These are coordinated.
Yeah, I have a buddy of mine he's a Christian missionary, great person. And that's kind of his beef. He's like, I can understand, you have the right to dislike who you want to dislike. That's America, right? We have those rights. But he was just like, man, they blow up your churches. He's like, they burn your churches. And I'm like, you don't even know the half of it. And we had that conversation. But that was something that was very much jarring to him. I think he's in Africa now. But that was something that was jarring. He was like, man, like how do you shoot up churches? Like, how do you burn churches? How do you lynch people on church grounds? That's not an opinion, guys. Read it yourself. That's what we promote. This stuff is documented. And that got to him the most. But again, that stuff we already knew. But that's a part of the information that's being banned that you talked about. That's, it makes certain people feel bad, or why are we discussing it? I don't think people discuss it to make anyone feel bad. But again, if you don't discuss the history, you're doomed to repeat it. You don't know it. All that information is important. And some people are afraid of it because it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing as an American to say, You know, even the church I go to, there are, when I first became a member of this particular church, no police were there. Now, police drive by every 5 minutes. They're walking around the church. That is insane. This is a Sunday. This is a place of worship, and I'm a target because I'm a Black person going to a Black church. Like literally, it's like a police state on Sunday, and that's uncomfortable. But that happens in the United States, and some people are going to hear that and want to push back on that. But hey, you're more than welcome to come to church with me. You can witness this yourself. And that's not the only church that's having that experience. There'll be some comments that people will be like, mine too. So perhaps you're unfamiliar with this, but it's true. It happens. But I think a way for us to mend any type of issues.
Even the church bombing that happened in Alabama with the 4 little girls that got widely publicized, they were closely linked to Dr. Angela Davis, because she's from Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
And outside of just, you can't go to church, you can't even go to the grocery store. They just shot up the grocery store in Buffalo, in New York, upstate New York.
Yeah,
that was something else that was widely publicized. Or even, you could be in your home and you're still a target. Look at that police officer, that white lady that went up in there and shot this dude, talking about she thought she was in her apartment or somebody was in her apartment.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden you don't know where you live. You need detail for everything else. You got to have questions and protocol for that, but you don't know where you live within this building. And his brother is unarmed and she killed him. And all that happened out of that was 10 years. And even that's not progress. That ain't progress, that woman went to jail for 10 years. If we understanding it, listen, this the sacrifice the state was willing to make. The same thing with the guy that nailed on George Floyd's neck. I'm not going to acknowledge these white folks, but yeah, it's the same thing. That's not progress. Progress is killing the conditions that that led to these people thinking they could do this in the first place. And I'm sorry, I stumbled a little bit because I was trying to avoid cussing on here. But yeah, like,
what do you think the solution is?
Honestly, I don't have a outside of political education is one way to go about it. Organization is another, but it's all of these are solutions that are easier said than done, right? Because there are people that I believe to have been far greater than me that have tried this, i.e. Malcolm, i.e. the Panthers. For Malcolm to be a devout Muslim, he put his religion in the closet for a lot, and that's kind of what we need. Because sometimes religious differences get in the way. Oh, this person's a Muslim, this person's a Baptist. I'm gonna put it all the way out there. I'm an atheist, but respect to I try to just live life correctly, as far as like, all right, cool. I see you as a human. We're gonna go about it like that. I'm not here to judge nobody's religion, because, like Malcolm said, leave that in the closet. We'll be arguing all day if it's a matter of religious difference, as far as that aspect of it goes. But even like Huey understood it, Malcolm understood it. It is bringing it back to the people on the block that need it the most. Even if I put it in other contexts, as far as like Marxist Leninism, because the Panthers followed that ideology, it is, so much as you got people that are part of the proletariat, which would be your working class that are exploited for their labor. And then you got the lumpen proletariat, which is the sub class that's like they're unemployed, they're undereducated, so on and so forth. As far as that particular aspect of it is concerned, it is having a grassroots movement. It's having those conversations, those difficult conversations. It's like, yo, what they used to do to us during slavery was, okay, cool, we're going to give you recreational stuff that is not to your benefit. So you get to drink, you get to go fool around a little bit. But we know that this doesn't mean anything. The moment you organize, the moment you articulate, the moment you galvanize those that are around you to come out of it, now you're a threat to the state, which is exactly what happened to the Panthers. Think about it in the context of Fred Hampton was 21 years old, and I mentioned Chairman Fred.
Mm.
I mentioned that particular ancestor because December 4th just passed, so we 11 days removed. Fred Hampton would still be here. Fred Hampton would be in his 80s, or I would like to hope that he would still be here. A
Yes.
lot of our freedom fighters would still be here. But as far as the Panthers are concerned, what ultimately did them in was we couldn't get through state repression. And even the way that I look at it, as far as state repression is concerned, anybody that is a government informant, which is how Chairman Fred got killed,
Mm-hmm.
anybody state repression. Like Malcolm said, they will pay one of us to kill one of us just to say that it was one of us. So, oh, it can't be a racist attack, or oh, it can't be white supremacy because a black person did it. You get mouthpieces for white supremacy all the time.
Divide and
Candace
conquer.
Owens, Tim Scott, Clarence Thomas, and these are people that are, you know, with the exception of Candace Owens, people that are in a position to change things in the community in which Eric Adams, going back to New York.
Man, Eric Adams is catching it.
And it throws out people mixed signals, which is like part of the issue that I see is like, it's like, all right, cool. Well, I see such and such up there lobbying for this person. A la Ice Cube for like Republicans and stuff like that. Or you see this celebrity. So, you know, I think the solution is political education. I think it has to be organization. I think it has to be having those serious conversations.
Yeah.
I want to go out and blast my music and, you know, and party and do stuff like that too. But it's also like having a balance between it. Like I said, I would go when I was in high school. I would go to the library, get my work done there, and then come and kick it on the block for a few hours. Especially if it was like a Friday, I'm out till like 2, 3 in the morning, just hanging.
Right.
So it was never losing sight of, okay, well, this is where I come from. Which side of the house is right here? I'm not trying to escape the hood. I'm trying to escape the conditions that we live under within the hood itself. Because within that hood are people that know my mother, that have been other mothers to me, people that have stopped me from getting into certain situations, people that I've been able to observe so I myself don't go into certain situations. So Woodside Projects will always be home to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I grew up a stone's throw away from Queensbridge.
Oh wow. Oh yeah.
I spent 2 years living in Queensbridge before I moved out of New York.
Okay.
Like it, you know, and even with that, I'm able to walk around because it's like, all right, cool. I've never mentioned institutionalized education because I don't believe that that's it. You
Right.
know, it that is what it is. It'll give you structure for some people, but I need to be able to see how this relates to the people that I know that are from where I'm from,
Mm-hmm.
or
So,
how this can help move them along. But I also, you can only help somebody that wants to help. So I'm very understanding of that. And
oof.
it's like I also want to see them be better than what they are in certain situations.
Right.
And
They have to want it.
we have the capacity. We have the capacity. In spite of capitalism, in spite of it, we have the capacity. And we have to connect not only, you know, don't let mainstream media dictate your worldview. Because if mainstream media dictates your worldview, you're already in trouble. Because why in the hell would the people that are there to oppress you give you the actual information you need to advance? And the Panthers, again, understood that, which is why they had their own propaganda that needed to be circulated. You know, organizations like All African People's Revolutionary Party understood that. That's why political education is important. Organization decides everything. That's important. The ability to mobilize, the ability to not only connect with your people here in the States, but across the diaspora, and also be able to connect to other third world people and other oppressed people's situation. You know, the unfortunate part is we got so many people where it's like, oh, we can't relate to what's going on in Palestine. Yes, you can. Because if you can understand state repression here, as far as the way your neighborhood is policed, you can understand repression that the Palestinian people have been going through since 1917. We got to take it out of the context of 1947, 1948, which you've got the you know, anti-communist propaganda at that time. You've got Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier at that time. You're on the pretty much the edge of the civil rights movement as they know it and as they contextualized it, right? Because it's the end of the 40s kind of going in. This started in 1917. There is legal document, there is legal precedent. We also have to look at stuff outside of what's perceived as law. The law itself was never put in place for us to be able to be anything other than subjugated to the state.
Oof.
Police, uh, am I still there?
Yeah, I hear you.
My iPad just told me I got like 10% battery life left. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna try to put this on a charger.
All right.
But yeah, it's yeah. Don't worry about it. So yeah, the system is designed for us to be subjugated to it. Police are not there to protect the people or to serve the people. They're there to protect property and serve moneyed interest. And I think if people understood that more, they would look at it differently. The Panthers understand or understood that by way of Malcolm, by way of Dr. King and other things that they were reading. It wasn't until Malcolm is killed in 65.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. King is killed in 68. Dr. King was killed when he decided he was also going to galvanize all poor people, when he was going to let them know what this system is about, what it does. It wasn't in the South that he found deep poverty. It was in Chicago that
Man,
he
don't.
found deep poverty that was the eye opener for him. And then to kind of go back to Malcolm, anything south of the Canadian border is South. Don't be shocked when you're faced with racism in New York and New Jersey, as was the case with the son of Shakur.
Yeah.
Don't be
Yeah.
surprised when it's in Oakland. It's literally embedded in the fabric of the United States. This is a system that this is all it knows. So when you see the United States being pro-Israel, why is that? The Panthers understood why that is. Imperialism is a thing that people have to come to grips with, learn it, understand it, put it on a level to where your kids can understand it. Because one of the things that I hear often too is, oh, they're too young for that. Why are they too young for that when the state don't think they're too young for it?
Mm-hmm.
We got 8, 9, 10-year-olds, being met with police repression. Our kids are suspended at a higher rate. We get sent to juvenile detention centers more. We're more likely to face cash bail. So don't talk about they too young. I think fortunately enough for me, my mother understood that there's no such thing as they're too young. She had this thing, even though I don't agree with the tactic. My mother used to say, chastise them now so they don't kill them later. And I never understood who the hell they were until I became of age to where I'm like, okay, cool. She's talking about the state. She's talking about the stuff that I'm going to have to deal with as a Black man walking through this space.
Mm-hmm.
She gave it to me straight. So there was no sugarcoating. There was no finding the right book, the right way to deliver the information. It was coming out. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where we fall short. Stop trying to strategize about how to say something to your kids and tell them, listen, this is what it is.
Yeah. No, I agree with you on that. Yeah.
Like it's and again, the Panthers understood that. Even going back to Mumia was a Panther. I think he was like 14 or 15 years old, but he was already introduced to Fanon. He was already introduced to people that he could read and draw from and understand his conditions more deeply.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is what people, I think, need to understand. And you have the right to feel how you want to feel because you've experienced it, right? These are things that you personally have experienced growing up. These are things that your friends have went through. You've identified it with it. So you have the right to feel how you want to feel. Clearly, that's why we're having this conversation. So what people need to understand, and this reminds me of the book, The Hate You Give, right? The Hate You Give is this book that talks about how people basically have experiences that shape their frustration. You actually, it's a movie now, so you get the book or watch the movie, whatever you prefer. I would prefer to put your eyes to the words. But no, it talks about that you have the right to feel how you want to feel, Shaquille, and I think people need to understand that, because these are things that have shaped your personality, because you've read it, you've experienced it. um People have experienced it. But what I'm really big on is, you've already said it, raising kids right. Explaining to them some circumstances that they may experience, may not experience, but don't be you need to be cognizant of those situations that may arise. Like you said, stop trying to strategize things that could happen. These are things that you may experience. It's not saying that you will, but these are things that, hey, they can occur, they can happen. Okay, even former President Barack Obama talks about walking on campus as a law student, and security saying, "Let me see your ID," and he's like, I'm a student here. Like, what's the problem? So look, we're not trying to say everyone is a target, but the argument that you're making is that it can happen, and why does it happen? Okay, and that is the linear issue. Why does it happen? And it's okay to say maybe some people are targeted because of their skin color. We're not saying every single person has an agenda. That's not the argument at all, but it does happen, right? Ahmaud Arbery, why was he targeted? Okay, no matter how you dissect it, what was the issue there? So that's what I wish people would get to it, and I hate that everybody's so polarized and divided. They want to say, everyone's not this, everyone's not that. That stuff that I shouldn't even had to say that. But the issue, the bottom line, the common denominator, take it back to college algebra. What? Or actually, that's probably high school algebra. Some people are like, that's high school. All right, why does it happen? Right? And when it does happen, why can you, Shaquille, ramble off all these names a couple times that happen a month or a year or whatever? We shouldn't have that in the United States. And that was the issue with the Panthers, right? Why are these issues correlating? Why is there a relationship? And the Panthers took it upon themselves, hey, I think policing the police is a good idea. And that is something that the Panthers took note of. Why is this group behavior, because that's what it was at the time, happening? And that was the issue with Daryl Gates back in LA. Daryl Gates, Maxine Waters, and Mayor Bradley. Yes, that was their issue in LA. Why is this a pattern? Okay, and now that we can identify that pattern, how can we get to a solution?
They strip one of the solutions away with removing books or removing the ability to freely teach history. For a place that one of the slogans is, landed it free, to incarcerate more people per capita than anybody else, to not allow people freedom of thought, freedom of religion is not even really a thing. Look at the things that happen around people's religions. Oh, Muslim terrorists. Muslim could be anybody. You got, like Malcolm said, when he went to Mecca, there was blonde haired, blue eyed people that was Muslim. Right. So you got repression along those lines too. And being from New York, I was there for 9/11. I was in high school. So I know for a fact that people that were, Muslim had to change their names, or people had to, in certain denominations, remove their hijabs or remove other religious dressing in order to not be targeted. I do believe that anybody that the state sees as subhuman is targeted. We got detention centers right now where women are being given illegal hysterectomies.
Oh my goodness, that is.
We got Black and brown people being subjected to state repression, to state sanctioned violence now. You got people protesting for Palestine because about 40 to 50% of the people that are killed or that were killed were babies, with children. Now, again, and I tie everything to hood politics sometimes. One of the things we understood, I don't care how they paint African people as violent or whatever. No women, no kids was something we understood in the hood. The government don't even understand that. And again, they are killing the people that are entrusted with education, with delivering the news. If you had freedom of press, how come journalists being fired for what they say in favor of or in support of Palestine? That's not freedom of press. Ain't that in the books they wrote? Ain't that part of the game they run? So to have these things, the Panthers understood that too. We need propaganda of our own in order to fight their propaganda. That's
Yeah,
why there was a
I
Black
get it.
Panther paper. That's why there's so many books out, kind of let the people know. Even before that, I read Du Bois, I read Garvey. I think all of these are important for reading Krumah. I think all of these are important for understanding, you know, where we are, how we've arrived here. People can have dissenting opinions in regard to what gets said about the targeting of people, but I honestly believe that any and everywhere, at any moment, it can be you. It's that simple. I'm not going nowhere. Listen. I walk around here, the same way I would walk around anywhere else. I've had I've had to check a few college professors doing my undergraduate work just because of the way that they spoke. You don't speak to those students like that and be condescending in a space where they're trying to learn. And it's deliberate because you already have a preconceived notion about me walking up in your classroom with a hoodie with headphones, dressed a certain way, which would be another thing is why I tell people to also get out of respectability politics, bring it back to the brothers from the block. I'm not coming in there suited and booted. I'm coming in there with a hoodie. I'm coming in there with a fitted cap. I'm coming in there the way that I need to, and then we'll talk about it amongst then. I could chop it up on the level you need me to, or I got to be able to dissect it for my people back home. I got to be able to go to the bench with my boys and with some of the younger sisters and be like, yo, this is what it is. This is what they're talking about. And I have these conversations often.
Hmm.
I'm okay with dissenting opinion, but one thing that can't be disputed is historical fact.
Yes. Yes. You think you can make it palatable for people who just aren't interested at all? They're TikToking all day, all that, and that's by design. This. It's addictive. That's where their brain is. How do you get them back to realizing that that's a distraction?
I'll go back to what I stated before, which is everybody can't go. I think it's a situation where like you could talk to people and meet them at a human level. I talk to my boys all the time about like sports, like
Right.
or we'll talk about other stuff. We'll talk about like TV shows and stuff like trivial things. We'll talk about that. But then it also has to be a conversation about state of affairs, has to be a conversation about what's going on in Palestine, has to be a conversation about what's going on in our community, has to be a conversation as to why these things are happening. It's easier said than done. I think we're trying to combat several centuries of state repression at the federal and local levels. We understand it's not an overnight process. It may not even happen in my lifetime, and I'm, not even 40 years old yet. And I'm like, the work itself has to be done. We have to have these conversations. Those that want to listen, you may only get 2 people out of 10 people that want to listen. That's fair enough. Build from there.
Hmm.
You build from there. I can't proselytize uh certain things. Like I can't proselytize liberation to people that don't necessarily want it because what they've been conditioned to be within the context of the US is everything is on an individual scale. And we see it from young on, like, oh, I got these pair of sneakers, you ain't got these, I got this, and it's always that attainment of material things. And I had to decondition myself away from it. Like I might have this on, or I might feel good in a moment, but why my man over here feel bad about what he got on, or his clothes might be a little dingy, but my clothes is clean, or he might not have eaten today, but I ate today. How can I make it to where everybody eats today, to where everybody feels good about themselves? And it's really just breaking it down and having those conversations. We have to meet the material needs of the people. And that begins with education, but then it's also like to get them to listen, it, that's easier said than done. You could start talking to somebody who could walk off, or you could start talking to somebody just like, oh, that's crazy. I know me personally, if somebody's saying something I don't want to hear, by the time I get to that third, that's crazy, I already stopped listening. And it's like that. There people, it's like, all right, cool. I respect you enough to listen to what it is that you got to say, but I haven't heard anything past, yo, what's going on? How's your day? What's going on with this? When you get to when you get down to it, and talk about the things that really matter, you're not gonna have a lot of people. That's the unfortunate part. You're not gonna have a lot of people that's listening, and part of it is a lot of people, because they've been conditioned to everybody want to lead, nobody want to follow, nobody wants to be on even footing, and always has to be that, oh, I got this one up. I'm not above reproach. So if I say something that's wrong, all right, cool. You could tell me I'm wrong. I'm going to analyze it. And then if I'm wrong and I'm met with a contradiction, the one thing you have to understand about the Panthers as revolutionaries, or about any revolutionary figure in history, when they're met with contradictions, it's going to change the way that they approach things, the way that they look at things. Iron sharpens iron. So in understanding that particular part of it, you have to be willing to be met with dissenting opinion, as well as you're able to talk. Like it's like if I'm just talking and nobody else is able to get their word in edgewise, we don't come together with the collection of ideas that we should have in order to advance everybody. It has to be less about the individual, more about the collective. If it's not about the collective, we are failing as a people. If it's
Everybody
not
can
about,
go.
my bad, iPad is like just dying out on me.
Everybody can't go.
Everybody can't go because everybody's not going to want to listen.
Understood.
And I see that now with just the way that some of the people that I know worship celebrity. It's like you don't know these people in real life, So when somebody say that Diddy did something, okay, cool, whatever. You listen to the music and then you turn it off to a certain, and you could do that to a certain extent. Separate the artist from the art, or separate the person from the art. You could do that to a certain extent, because there are people that have done heinous things where it's like, I'm not looking at this person the same again, you know, namely like R. Kelly specifically. Like, I can't go back and listen to dude's music. You talking about the crime that you're doing within the song that you're singing. But
Yeah.
yeah, it has to be. It also has to be conscious, what I call conscious consumption.
Mm.
Yeah, you could listen to some of this stuff. You could read some. You could watch some of these reality TV shows, but don't let the reality TV show that's scripted become your reality. Don't let
Absolutely.
these things consume you. At some point, you have to pick up a book that's actually going to stimulate your intellect. You have to look at these things differently. Like, if you stop growing mentally, that's it.
Absolutely. Consumerism, that's something that you mentioned a few moments ago. Those sneakers, that's consumerism. People don't realize all these other people are getting rich. You will always be the consumer. Think about being the merchant. Okay. I come from a family of entrepreneurs, so some people they're just so used to making all these other companies super rich, and they don't realize that without their dollars, that company isn't a billion-dollar company. So be cognizant of where your dollar is going and realize how you're being exploited. Think about that. Consumerism is pervasive with some people. That is something that people aren't aware of, but that goes in the category of financial literacy. Some people just need a little bit more financial literacy, for sure.
I think that's one part of it, but I also think understanding, capitalism is a system that's centuries old. It started on the backs of slavery. We can't use the method that got us in the mess to get us out of the mess.
Doesn't help.
It's on a fundamental level. It makes zero sense. Food, nobody should be without housing. Nobody should be without education, or the things that I've grew up around. So I'm speaking from personal experience, and being a kid from the projects in New York, and being that kid from West Side Projects, and just coming up through it. Like, yeah, our clothes were clean, or whatever the case may be. We never had to worry. But all the people that were around me, I'm like looking at people that have to go through foster care system, and which is a whole nother conversation. I'm looking at people come to school with dirty clothes. One kid, you seeing kids being transferred out of classes, kids being criminalized, at a young age. And all of this part of it is racial capitalism. We understand that chattel slavery is over, but we also have to understand that it's been redirected. People gravitate towards this damn 13th Amendment, which is flawed in itself.
Oh
Mm-mm.
yes, the
Look at the
loophole.
percentage. Look at the percentage of us that are locked behind a wall. Our folks are the only ones that get persecuted and get incriminated over a thought, that we may have had. And you can see white people on camera doing the most heinous things, and they walk freely. We just talked about it earlier with the Rodney King beating. We talked about it, with Latasha Harlins. So it has to be these hard conversations. It has to be, persistence, I think, is key as well. So persistence, having these conversations, organizing around it, and getting from up under the boot of capitalism.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is a conversation that needs to be had. Oftentimes, you hear, about capitalism and socialism and Marxist Leninism and all this other stuff, and people freak out and start calling you a communist. And but it's okay to have these conversations. I've had in the past, and they know who they are, some professors back in the day, not too fairly back in the day, but back in the day, who went on a whole smear campaign because of some ideas, just a thought. Education, this is a place where you're supposed to discourse, bounce these ideas. Doesn't mean you hate someone, it doesn't mean you dislike someone, but an academic institution is a place where you have these hard conversations, just like we're talking about now. It doesn't mean that people aren't going to get up in the morning and go to work. It's a part of a discourse. And like I said, I was having some appropriate conversations in an academic institution. I had a professor who took offense, like, and this is a person in a leadership position, mind you, in a graduate program where you would think that the conversation should be advanced. But a lot of that had to do with his particular inability to not know. Sometimes he just didn't know. His educational background was not competent to where he was teaching. I'll just say that. But like, it's still a thought. So because you disagree with someone's discourse and conversation and the like, you go on an entire smear campaign and try to, get this person, banished. Like, that says more about you, right? Because a good attorney, let's just say this, a good Black attorney could easily be like, I can defend a Klansman's freedom of speech. That doesn't mean I agree with it. But in the United States, as long as you're not libeling or slander, anything like that, you can say this Klansman can say what they want to say, right? You don't have to agree to say, look, people feel the way they want to feel. You don't agree with it, but in the United States, people have the right to say what they want to say. So as far as you saying that people are dismissed because of their ideas, Panthers, the FBI, we know that, and that's not an opinion, that's a fact. J. Edgar Hoover, right? He said it, he wrote it down. Again, they broke into the media building. I think that was 1971 in Pennsylvania, where all those documents are available. So if anyone is interested, you can research that yourself. But I personally have been on a lower level of that, right? Where I had some individual at a university who was in power who took offense to my just ideas to think of something that could benefit people a little differently. Okay. And of course, it didn't, but that's how people are when they oftentimes have the power. You may not be what they want. And I'll just say that, whatever their particular agenda was. And They took it upon them. They were unsuccessful, but they took it upon themselves to start, lying, manipulating. But that's all deceitful Lucifer practices that happen. But I was already prepared for that, and that goes back to the conversation that you said parents need to have with their children. I was already prepared for that. That conversation had already, I've been spoken to about that since I was a kid. So what some don't realize is you're throwing this stuff to throw people off course, but we're already prepared for it. We see around corners and we're 5 steps ahead. So that particular person, man, was in a leadership position at a university, wasn't a
Mhm.
graduate program, was unsuccessful. And like I said, it was just a conversation. It was just a thought. It wasn't that, like I said, anything would change. We're not legislators, we're not in Congress, but in a place where conversations should be had, which is a university. But again, you are a target. You are a target when
I
those.
think, and I'll end it here because I got an appointment that I got to be at within the next few minutes. So I think that the reason why I look at education that way is because the same people that are entrusted with educating you are indoctrinated by the system that they're educating you through. So on a fundamental level, one certain buzzwords get thrown out there, or I hear something, it automatically triggers that. Like, yeah, you on that type of time, so I'm gonna do what I need to do in order to get through this class. But I know better. It's I've had college professors ask me, where I'm from or how I know because I'm not just taking your class as the end all be all. I have to read independently. I have to see where things are historically, as
Mhm.
far as because if you're indoctrinated by the same system that's trying to indoctrinate me listening to you makes no sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have this degree, but I'm already aware of people that don't have a degree or people that are locked behind the wall that I believe to be exponentially smarter than this college professor that's
Mhm.
standing whatever university.
Man,
And that
care.
goes for Ivy, that goes for HBCU, the same thing. Some of
Absolutely.
our brightest have been locked behind the wall for ridiculously long periods of time and stripped of their ability based off of their way to be able to articulate a point based off of their ability to be able to be free thinking. In a capitalist system, even your thinking is commodified.
Understand. I understand. Anything else you want